Welcome to our discussion today on navigating change in today's future of work. I'm Tamara McCleary, the CEO of Thulium, and I'm so excited to introduce an extraordinary panel. With us today is Christal Bemont, CEO of Talend, Dr. Marcia F. Robinson of the HBCU Career Center, and Janet Schijns, CEO of JS Group. I'd like to have each of you briefly introduce yourselves. Christal, let's start with you.
Thanks, Tamara, and thanks for having me. I'm Christal Bemont, and I'm the CEO of Talend. I started in January of this year, right before COVID kicked off, and so I'm excited about the topics we're here to talk about.
Hi, everyone. I am Marcia Robinson. I'm a human resources executive for about 20 years now. And my most recent passion is researching how artificial intelligence technology is coming into the human resources function and what our attitudes and perspectives are to that.
That's great. I'm Janet Schijns. I'm CEO of the JS Group, and my claim to fame is I am about everything digital. In fact, I just trademarked the term digital normal. So we'll talk about that a little more as we go through today.
Nice.
Wow, that's so cool. You coined a term. That's awesome. It's like maybe a star or something. Well, to kick this off, Christal, it seems as if every part of business has a new set of rules and needs, right? So how is your company, Talend, or you as the leader, right? And you stepped into this, boy, did you jump into the frying pan, right? Maybe from frying pan to the fire. But so as a leader, reacting to these unusual circumstances, how is it, affecting your employees, your customers, and, the market in general?
I don't think there's a single person that hasn't been impacted, and it's probably varied across the spectrum. Our employees, first and foremost, I was the first time CEO, so not just a CEO in this pandemic, but for the first time. And we have a global organization, and it's hit our global, our world very differently across different waves. And so for me, it was really about looking at how do we balance the lives and livelihood of our organization. And our employees have done an amazing job taking care of one another, but it's physical and emotional, meaning mental health, making sure that we really pay a lot of attention to what does it mean for people to really deal with the circumstances, as well as then work remotely in a very isolated, maybe I would say mostly uncertain set of circumstances. And uncertainty is a state that's very hard for a lot of us. And so really focusing on how we help our employees so they can help our customers, because we have seen that this has brought a lot of needs for our customers really focus on data integration and integrity to make sure that they can digitize their business.
Yeah, I can't highlight enough what you just said about uncertainty. And I think the thing is that we're talking about the human element here. And, as much as we all, feel like we're innovative and we're agile and we can move and change, there's a certain part of us as human beings that like to have a certain level of security and certainty. And when you shake that security, to me, I think it changes the game. Janet, you talk an awful lot about the future of work. You're out there in a big, bold way, helping and educating companies, both small and large. How do you see the future of work changing in the next 2 to 5 years?
It's interesting. I was talking last year about how our industry and our world had entered into a time of digital normal. And those that were still talking about digital transformation were in fact falling behind. In fact, at the end of last year, I gave a speech called Fast is the New Big. And what's interesting is the pandemic sped this trend up. It wasn't created by the pandemic, it was enhanced by it. And it became very apparent as the world changed this March due to COVID that many firms were in fact very, very far behind digitally for the new world we find ourselves in. And so those firms who'd already used data to become customer obsessed and as a result were already where their customers were, got a head start during the remote work trend. Those who didn't, well, that metamorphosis is difficult to do during a pandemic. So many firms just haven't caught up yet. That modern enterprise is an agile workplace. It's built on data. It's powered by AI. So I see this divide in the future of work between those firms who are permitting teams to work from home with some video conferencing apps or, other things versus enabling them to work from home, using data and AI to improve their results. And so what we're seeing is this whole have and have not. You can't put this genie of working remote back in the bottle. The firms that were doing it well are going to be the winners. So our research at JS Group shows that 40+% of employees intend to keep working remote, and 60% of the top talent in our industry wishes to work remote at least 50% of the time. So the headquarters is really going to change, and it's going to become less about people commuting to a desk job and more about a data, AI-led, community-minded work hub for the firm. And so, I really see a lot of interesting changes coming. And I always like to talk to one kind of cool thing. And so we've actually seen designs now for pods that will be dropped off in key executives' yards, key players' yards.
Wow.
That has everything a high-profile employee needs to be productive, not at their kitchen table.
Wow, Christal, you're going to be getting a pod dropped off.
I was just thinking, I was just trying to imagine how I might decorate my pod with, what am I going to put in my pod? And that does give mobile working a whole new meaning, doesn't it? And I can only think about pods when you're moving and you put your stuff in your pods. And so
it's a lot like that, but it has a window. But it has all the technology and security and a bespoke wireless network in it that the kids can't be downloading stuff on, and there are security cameras. It locks up, right? So because we're seeing a lot of security hacks happening right now,
Definitely.
Work remote, and all kinds of people are seeing, corporate data, et cetera. So we're really seeing this trend of enablement of key employees, and the pod is an extreme example. But I think you're going to see a lot of changes come about of how we enable folks to work from home.
I like the pod idea, Janet, but I also think that anything that makes us go, wow, that's so wild, is exactly what we should be looking at.
100%.
And so to me, whatever seems to trigger, my fascination with wow, that seems so science fiction-like, is exactly what I should be looking at, because I think that's where we're driving toward the future. Marcia, you've got 2 decades in HR. And
2 decades.
Like,
2 decades of HR, and as HR professionals, even though my forte is always saying we need to be involved with every change that happens in the organization. We should be helping other departments, other functionalities move forward. But we ourselves, we struggle with our own change because, we always perceive change as loss. Not that it could be just this bigger, better thing. Janet's talk about a pod, being dropped off in your yard makes me think about all of how the ripple happens, because now you have zoning people who are going to get involved, and you have A that's going to be involved, and it's that's kind of how HR is. There are all these ripples to every change. One of the organizations that I do a lot of work with, 84-year-old organization, does a lot of work for the government, but the last thing they were thinking about was, a disruption due to a pandemic. The only time we talk, sustainability was when we were talking about succession planning and retiring, and folks that were moving out. And then here comes March 13th or March 16th, where we literally had to leave the office and not go back. And that was, there was a period between March 16th and say August 29th when things were really, really rough. When you have staff whose notion is, I work with files, I work with paper files. I need to be around my files. And so that whole concept of trying to look at people's attitudes and their perspectives towards not just the change, but all of the supporting things that happen when you start putting changes in place.
Yeah. It sounds to me, Marcia, that you're talking about a cultural shift.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And cultural shifts are not, strategic and, we'll get this initiative done. Cultural shifts are deep, and, they really upend almost everything and create, Christal, to your point, a lot of this uncertainty. Christal, how have you dealt with this at Talend?
I think, and just listening to what you were saying, Marcia, I think one of the most difficult things for people is working in a way where they're not actually physically around other people. The social aspect of this, there's one thing of what can I do to get my job done? And I do think I'm a big believer, and I think this comes from my upbringing and the way that I look at adversity. I think adversity brings opportunity. And I think it is not only the resilient nature of a business or people, but I think it forces you to be better. I think it forces you to up level and think outside the box. And I think it's a disruptor. And it can be, if done the right way, very positive. But the one piece that I do spend a lot of time thinking about, I was thinking about it before the pandemic, which is the interactions that people have, the ability for people to stop and talk to each other, have a conversation, look at each other in the eyes. We're already, with technology, moving in everyone's looking down at their phones and walking past each other, and the human connection. I do think this topic of people feeling disconnected, even though you're on a Zoom, not only the toll that Zoom and just being in front of your computer all day takes. I've worked from home for myself for 20 years. So I've done this. I know what that means. And I know the pitfalls, but I do think a lot about human interaction and what the pandemic in social life is going to be. You can see how it is. You're required to stay away from each other. But going back, even if you were to go back to the office, it does not mean the same thing for some period of time. So the emotional toll that it takes on people not being around each other and socializing in typical ways is something that I really spend a lot of time making sure this organization supports our people and thinks about how are people feeling isolated. It's a really important topic.
Such a great point. And, when you saw companies triage rapidly, right? So they adopted comms tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody talks about Zoom, but I'm a big fan of platforms like Star to Star and 8 to 8 because they actually show you how frequently people are participating.
Mm-hmm.
So you can actually see who is and isn't involved. But as we think about this next wave of remote work related problems, they're even harder to solve. There's fewer unstructured meetings. There's less serendipitous conversations. You think about being in an office, you can find that assistance if you have an issue. Managers can walk the floor. Executives can gauge morale and guide teams. But when you migrate from bustling offices to isolated living rooms, right? Just like you were saying, the teams suddenly lack the assistance, the visibility, the direction that an office kind of offers them. And the stakes for this have never been higher. People feel isolated. Managers are flying blind. Executives are struggling.
I'd say too that creativity actually suffers sometimes.
Yeah.
So although we're thinking we're going to be more innovative, those ideas that pop off just because of a conversation in a hallway, or, hey, I'm doing this, how are you handling that?
Right.
That, in a way, some of that is gone. And so it's almost as you have to be very intentional about getting your people to focus on innovation and coming up with creative ideas and creative ways to do things, because you're missing that. It's hard to innovate when you're sitting in your kitchen.
Yeah, or sitting on back-to-back meetings, hour after hour after hour, which is where I see artificial intelligence coming in, right? So using those data and AI-powered applications, I think we can provide a better work experience because it can shift through a lot of behavioral data and identify signals and automate tasks and free up remote workers to spend more time on stimulating knowledge-based work. And I also think it can identify trends. I just saw a demonstration last week of eyeballs and engagement on a conference. Was able to very rapidly identify who the people were who were not feeling good about the process, right? Eyes down, right? Not because they were looking at a phone, but actual eyes down, body language, etc. So this is where I think the robots are going to come in to help us.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, though. I will just say I've noticed, and I do pay a lot of attention to when you grow up with the DNA of sales and the psychology of selling. There's ideas of mirroring and all these other concepts that you really pay attention to the body language and even the tone and the pulse and all these different things of the parties in the room. And when you're looking at that on Zoom, because you have this little square that you're looking at, it's a very distorted view of how because someone could be looking down at their notes, or they could be feeling defeated, and you really can't see them entirely. And this idea of the communication and how you interact, I do think that it is, I think, Marcia, you're 100% right. This is the point of intentionality. Like, we have to be really thoughtful about taking time for something where it's creative outlet, where it's a riff session, where it's a brainstorming, because it has turned into these back-to-back-to-back, almost round-the-clock meetings that gives no space for something I call flow, like the ability to have creative, natural thoughts that are unstructured intentionally, that allow for some of the greatest things to come up. And I think that's where people would find, you'd go past people at the water cooler at lunch, you would catch some of the most valuable things that were the sidebar conversations that never were caught in a meeting, or the relationships were built there, or you build a little bit of bonding and rapport. And those things now, it's almost now you have to schedule. It's like online dating. You have to schedule your time to have time with people.
And you have to trust what you're hearing from your direct reports about how their people are doing. I know I've been in executive meetings where it's, no complaints. And here we went and did a survey of the employees who are actually working from home, or who have been for the last couple of months. And some people are still struggling. But can we bridge the gap? We absolutely can. But knowing it first, having people feel comfortable enough to share with us that, I struggled a little bit, but I've caught up. But to have people say, I'm still struggling with this.
If there is a hope out of all of this, is, for me, I think the conversation around mental and emotional health is so important, and one that has not been as prevalent and as really thoughtful, and, to use your word, intentional in the way that we take care of people. And I believe if there's, again, going back to what could be a silver lining in some of these areas of adversity that we face, if that topic becomes more prevalent and more commonplace, and therefore people feel more comfortable sharing that and knowing that it's okay, I believe we will be better off for it. And I think it's something that it has been a taboo subject for too long.
Way too long. I agree with you. And I heard this horrible comment from a woman the other day. And by the way, this pandemic is hitting women harder, right? Women are being off more, and they're having more responsibilities for this, their home student, etc. And one of the women told me that she has taken to putting a Post-it note on her screen. And back in the old days, we used to put a Post-it note on our screen to block the camera. She's now using a Post-it note to block having to see herself.
Oh, interesting.
Because he said her psychiatrist told her that it is very damaging to see yourself for hours and hours and hours at a time, and be continually judging yourself if you have, self issues. And I just thought it was so brave of her to bring it up. And it started this conversation amongst everybody on the call about how people really do find it tiring to be looking at themselves and constantly judging, look, is my hair okay? And so I really thought it was healthy that we're able to have these conversations. So, Christal, I agree with what you're saying. I think it's opened the aperture to be able to, as leaders, really touch our people and listen and help.
Well, I think you brought up something interesting, Janet, because it's unnatural for us to be in group conversations looking at ourselves. And it's highly distracting. So, for me, with I know all of you are doing a lot on Zoom. I purposely do not look at my image because it distracts me. I can't even think, because then I'm busy, we're picking myself apart. Like, oh my gosh, my hair's coming up. But
how do I leave that behind me?
Right.
So she has the laundry.
But we're not used to doing that. I mean, we're in discussions with colleagues and things. We aren't looking in a mirror. It's very almost narcissistic in a way. I mean, do you really want to get lost in that pool like Narcissus did? Because you're busy, critiquing yourself.
Right.
Well, in a positive way, though, I will challenge that a little bit, Tamara, because if you can, and if you're aware of it, I think this is about being self-aware. And your point about Janet, about the acknowledgement that someone has that is something that is taking a toll. I think this is where your own body language. Okay, and I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you, but someone will say, "Is something wrong?" And you'll say, "No, why would you say that?" And the look on your face, or the way that you're holding yourself, or you don't even sometimes realize. So I guess, again, like anything, there's definitely things that are detrimental. And then there are things that could be used as a way to move forward, and things that you wouldn't have an understanding of maybe how you're coming across and the way that people see you. And so I think with every one of these topics, and I am very careful to say that there's positive things that come out of something like this, because I know it's been so deeply, damaging and difficult, and it still will be, I think, for some time. But I cannot help but think that for every single area, there is something that we will advance on. There's something that you can find that is a positive way forward, and improvements. And
absolutely
different, but improvements.
I agree.
There was a question I wanted to ask each one of you to be able to offer. But first, I was going to say the one thing I think that's never helpful to ask someone or to comment is to say, "Gee, you look tired." That's a terrible thing to say, because you're like, "I was feeling fine, but now I'm totally self-conscious."
Yeah.
Yes. But anyway, I was going to ask if each one of you could give, just a quick one piece of advice to leaders navigating change in today's environment. Marcia, can you kick us off with that?
Sure. I'd say look everywhere for leadership. I believe we're moving into a never normal environment where we're almost going to have to customize experiences for every employee. And to the extent that you can do that, the better the employee experience. And I think it better your leadership is when you have satisfied employees. But just be thinking that leadership is everywhere, and involve people when you're thinking about changes. The folks who are most instrumental, who have the best ideas, are the ones who are touching the actual processes that we need to change. So to the extent that you can involve people and just look for leadership to grow and bubble anywhere.
I like that. So Janet, what do you think?
Sure. I think that if I was to give a piece of advice, it would be that understand that every business that starts up after April 2020, every student that graduates after 2020, every worker that joins you after 2020 will have been changed in a profound manner. And it's your job to understand that change and embrace what it means. And quite frankly, be kinder than the situation sometimes calls for, and find a way to follow your people into this new world. And most importantly, remember that how we quote unquote keep score has fundamentally shifted now. There are new metrics. They are more complex. They are less straight line. They are things that need much deeper data in order to understand. And I think we all as leaders have to educate ourselves on that and figure out how to do this. In the words of Descartes, "There go my people, I must follow them."
Good point.
All right, Christal, what's your piece of advice?
Well, look, I believe being a leader means being authentic and being transparent and having difficult conversations. And I believe this is the time to put action behind the words and to really show up in an authentic way that allows people to be themselves and to be open and honest. And I think it's about mindset, leading in a way that really helps people understand that we can get through anything. And the difference is what we believe and what we believe the opportunity is to come out on the other side stronger and better. But it's not to by any means mean that it'll be easy. These things are challenging. And I do think the being, kind to yourself, it's demonstrating the type of culture and the type of organization you want to be from the inside out, so that you show up in a way that is strength, that is a culture of taking care of one another, and one where people can bring their best selves under any condition to work.
I love that. You know, I want to address leadership deeper in just a moment. And one of the things that you made me think of, Christal, is that leadership is an improvisational art where we are called upon to respond, not react to everything that shows up in the moment. But I want to hit leadership, tab it just for a second, because what I thought would be really interesting in this future of work discussion is the burning question, the elephant in the room that we must address, which is, what are the skills or skill sets that you all see that are going to become more and more important? And, you know, if that's certifications, working knowledge, et cetera. So Marcia, sorry about that. Marcia, could you let me know, what is you see? I mean, after 2 decades in the HR field, what are we looking at in the future of work?
Wow, that's a lot. Let me no problem. I think if we're talking about skills that leaders are going to need moving forward, it would have to be that you get the business from one end to the other end, and that you get your people from one area to the other area. You have to understand the drivers of the business, and you have to pay attention to your people. I think, you know, Janet's response was really, really right on. Authenticity, and people have to see that. People have to believe you. People have to trust that you have a vision and that you're willing to explain that vision to people, but you're also willing to wait as they move along with you. I have found in my research, you know, people are willing to make changes when they feel that they're a part of the change.
Right.
It's hard for people to buy into change if they don't see themselves in the future. And I think that's the leader's responsibility, is to say, there is going to be a role for you. I want you to help me create it.
It's a great point.
Yeah, that's how I'm thinking about it. And to the extent that we can build leaders up to do that is to the extent that we're building better companies and better organizations, I think, moving forward.
I love that.
I like that. So you know, I'm going to jump in, Tamara, because I think one of the things I believe is that, you know, nothing happens until something's sold. And so I'm a sales and go-to-market, you know, leader from way back. And so I think the role of our sales leadership and our sales people is changing more dramatically than almost any other role. I mean, think of the world that we live in now. They can't go to events. If the corporate headquarters is open, they're not the people being let in because they're already having to contract how many people can come in. Nobody's traveling to see them, and they're not traveling to see anyone. And so I think that the role of the seller and the sales manager has shifted so fundamentally. We launched a program last year around social selling to try to help people start to get ahead. Now it is the only way you can sell, right? It is through this, you know, more virtual world of selling. And so I think the sales managers have had to adapt to say, well, how do I hire or train people to be good at virtual selling, especially in the enterprise space? And then the sellers have to understand, how do they and what do they do to sell in a world where, you know, they can't meet at the bar or have breakfast or go into the company. And so I think this shift in the skills of sales leadership and sales people to be good at using social media for selling is one of the most fundamental shifts we're ever going to see. And I don't think it goes back. The next generation of buyers, millennial buyers, already prefer to work on a social network versus in an in-person event. And so I think that's really a big skill we're going to see shift from us going and communicating to get information to us actually getting information so we can communicate using social selling. I think it's a huge, huge shift in our world.
I think you made a great. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh no, go ahead.
I love that point that you made about the generational differences, because now we're seeing Gen Z on scene in the workplace, and Gen Z, that's how they do life.
That's right.
And so it's not even a change for them.
No.
But anyway, I was just thinking Gen Z in there because I have Gen Zs at home. So
yeah. Well, and I was just going to say something similar to, I guess, as a drafting off of what you said, Janet. I believe there were some of these movements were already happening anyway, in the emergence of bringing some of the the Gen Z and all of the we have many generations of workers typically that sit within a company, and I'm already seeing that happen. And this is an accelerant, COVID, to do many things, quite frankly, that I think we're behind on in a lot of ways. And and actually just bring us to the forefront of digitization and all sorts of things that we are dragging our feet on, even work from home. Look, I've proven 20 years, I built a career working from home, not sitting in the office where everyone sees you every day, and still thinking, about how do you keep communication skills? And that's really the pivot that I would make. I think this is about different types of communication skills, but being extremely intentional. Leaders must have an acute awareness of how to work with employees. This was going to happen anyway. The globalization of this world, the Kevin Bacon example, we've moved from 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon in the workplace to 3 degrees and moving, and now that we're all virtual, because you would think, oh, well, do you have the experience of being, localized in a market? Well, almost all companies, if they don't have employees that are global, work with employees that are, or work with customers or partners that are global. This world is just becoming such a smaller universe that it's really about traversing the different circumstances, being super athletic. And what I love about it, and this is the opportunity and optionality, which I think COVID brings, is you can find workers anywhere. I think leaders looking for what I've always placed the most value on is when someone would say, well, where do you want your employee to be located? I would say, I want the best person for this role. Secondarily, let me know where they live, by the way. Now, that's not great for someone who's looking at talent acquisition because they're thinking, well, that really narrows it down. But when you think about diversity, I believe deeply having a diverse workforce is incredibly important. And I mean that in every sense of the word. But when I'm trying to source in a zip code or an area code, here in the Bay Area, I don't get as much of a diverse workforce as I'd want. We start to look at a little bit of everyone starts to look the same in a way to some degree especially if you're looking for specialized skills. Now you start to think about if people really do embrace, and I think the world is embracing now, that you can work from home out of necessity or out of opportunity, optionality of finding the best people around the world. I don't care where you live, that can contribute in a unique, diverse, but also in a very highly skilled way. I think we'll be better off for it. And as leaders, you must open up your thinking to that being the better outcome than everyone, finding the people in a certain zip code, or people have to live in a certain proximity of one another. That's just not the case. I think those skills will be very important.
On the other side of that, you have folks who, see the opportunity to get employed anywhere and worry about what that might do to cost.
This is true.
Their income. And so that sometimes undergirds some of the fear that people have with those transitions. And to the extent that we
couldn't agree more.
Yeah, we can help people understand that this just opened up opportunities for you as well, not other people in other areas. In terms of bringing people on board, I just wanted to say really quickly that the whole notion of how you onboard people, how you bring people into your culture, that is just shifting completely. And on one hand, we know that our Gen Zers, they are digital. But is that how they want to be onboarded? Is that how they want to feel like they're a part of an organization? Do they care to feel like they're a part of an organization?
Well, and how do you keep a culture of an organization where it's tangible, something you can actually explain?
Right.
Where they're not joiners of things like that, right? They're joiners of their own communities. They create their own communities. So when you think about millennials wanted to be part of the community, part of something bigger, right? That was the big drive. The Gen Zs are saying, well, I create my own kind of circle based on what, based on what I feel, based on where I want to be, based on what I want to join. That's a tough culture to have micro cultures within a company.
Definitely.
Well, and what we're talking about here, think about 2020, all of these massive shifts and changes where that 5-year plan turned into the 5-week plan. Leaders are scrambling, but, just to kick this off, I'm sure everybody's got a comment on it, but Marcia, I wanted to know, what do you think how the role of leadership is changing socially and politically? Think about what's going on in our world right now. So, how do you navigate that? What was your initial or immediate reaction to, what's going on in the workplace with, the social and political climate that we are all navigating right now?
I think we talked about wellness before. As a Black woman, I can tell you that is a real issue, and that employees, as an employee, as a worker, as a consultant, you're looking for people who are empathetic, who understand that, who get that. A lot of people are traumatized coming to work right now. And what does that mean for productivity? I know the one organization I worked with, I had to kind of, sit the executive director down and said, does this work really need to be done between 8 o'clock and 5 o'clock? What about the person logging on at 9 p.m. at night to do this work? How are we measuring outcomes? And if you've never really thought about that, even in an 84-year-old organization, those are some of the kinds of things that I see evolution in, where we have to kind of rethink what we thought leadership was. It's not that you have to see everybody to know that they're doing their work. It's coming up with new metrics for productivity. And I can tell you, it's sometimes harder to get the leader to be okay with that than it is to get the employees okay with that.
And don't you think, Marcia, that right now, I feel like there were some early studies on productivity, and there was all this talk about, oh, look how much more productive we can be at home. And I was very careful to caution anytime I heard that this is a very unrealistic, not at all a case study for measuring productivity, because people literally can't leave their house. So there's like one option, work or not work, but you're kind of in a contained environment, and also it's not sustainable. The productivity piece. So I've often thought that that's a very interesting comment that people, or even study that people are making, and I agree with you 100%. The way of measuring it and the productivity element of it is definitely something I think we have to be very careful with, for sure.
Agreed.
And I think I'll lean in a little bit on the political social element. So I can't find anyone now who doesn't feel that in some way, shape, or form they have something they're very passionate about on whatever side of whatever argument they're on, right? In almost an unprecedented way, people are passionate about things many times because they do spend so much time in front of the computer and they're reading a lot of different opinions. And unfortunately, people tend to surround themselves with people that have that have the same opinions, not different opinions, right? And so they get more and more spun up. And so I'm finding as a leader that it's really important to try to settle the teams down emotionally by trying to find pathways through to have the tough conversations. For example, I issued an article with channel partners about myself having witnessed discrimination against a Black colleague. And by the way, this was right after I'd gotten off a call where someone told me with my hair long, I looked like a squaw, and everyone on the call had to step back and go, oh my gosh, because I'm half Indian. So I said, thank you. The person didn't know that. My hair is curled today, but when my hair is flat and straight, I do in fact look like my heritage. And, I came off that call saying, we have to have these conversations. We have to start speaking up and saying these biases are unacceptable. no matter what your bias is, I can find a bias against every race, religion, sex.
No question.
No question, I can find a bias. And so having those conversations, I've found for my team, by me leaning in and saying, I'm going to have these conversations. And when somebody's doing something wrong, we're going to call it out. And so I did that. And then I also, on social media, kindly pointed out to someone in the industry that they had a 100% male. So it was a 100% male panel. And I said, these are some talented men, and I can't wait to see them talk, but I have to wonder, couldn't you have widened the pool? And they immediately came back, and we had a conversation, and they added women to the event. So I think we have to speak up, and we have to show our teams we're willing to speak up, but not in an angry way.
Absolutely.
Right? Not in a mob inciting, angry, emotional way, but in a way we're going to talk about it, and it's okay.
It's a precarious position. I will tell you, I've been thinking a lot about CEO activism in particular. And it's, look, coming into this role, first and foremost, there was so much press about the fact that I was a female CEO of a public company, but not only that I brought in a new CRO who was a female and a new chief customer officer who was a female. So the three of us, and there were some articles that I think meant well, but basically said something to the effect of 3 women take over for 1 man or something of that nature. It was not what was intended. It actually was very well-meaning and actually a very good journalist, but you could be interpreted to be something different. And there were a lot of, how do you feel about that art? And I said, well, first of all, I brought in these amazing individuals that first and foremost, literally never even considered that. I never even the thought, because it wasn't about that, about it being 3 women coming in. Right. I never realized it was going to be such a big deal, because I just think these are really talented individuals. And then it occurred to me, of course I know, intelligently, like, you will know intellectually that there are a deficit in females or gender having certain roles, but that wasn't why I brought those individuals into the roles. But more than anything, the topic of CEO activism really hit home for me with George Floyd. And I will tell you personally, again, coming in as a new CEO, being very thoughtful and careful about what my role is within an organization. I was hired to run a business and take care of people and bring a company from 250 million to $1 billion. In a space that does require innovation and disruption, and the world needs, for the reasons you said, Janet, data is at the heart of any digital transformation, and data fuels every single thing we do in our personal and professional lives. So I feel a huge responsibility to the reason I was brought in. I also thought very carefully about my personal views need to stay my personal views. And I've always thought that's very important. But there was a moment in time where I was deeply impacted, like the rest of the world, I'm sure, by what took place in the situation with George Floyd. And it hit me very hard personally. It hit me very hard professionally, because I sat and wrote an email to the company. It took me 6 hours. And I say that because I wanted to be so thoughtful and careful about the words I chose. I wanted to strike the right balance of really nothing, if I did nothing else but to say, I have no tolerance for this type of treating people of any difference unfairly or unjustly, or just my feelings as a leader of what I would tolerate. And so, but it moved in my mind to then I saw some of the CEOs not responding, and by not responding was a big voice. It was perceived as a big voice, and it was a non-response or silence spoke volumes in some ways that they may or may not have intended. What it did for me was to say, I think the role of a CEO, you have to be very careful, or any leader of any organization, your voice does matter. And it is a very careful balance, and not one that I have quite compartmentalized in my brain about how far you should go or not go. But I will say that I really struggled with whether I should write the email, and I'm so glad I did. And the things that I learned about some of the employees and the things that they shared, and maybe there were some that it didn't come across the way that I had intended to, but I think there were way more that they understood completely the compassion and the lack of tolerance that I'll have for people being mistreated. So anyway, this is just a really important topic. I think there'll be a lot of evolution around in what the role and responsibility is for CEOs and leaders around the globe.
I think you both touched on it, the concept of a pathway. I think you used that analogy, Janet, and I think that's powerful because it's not just a moment. It's not just, oh, I'm going to do this thing right now and this is going to happen. It is a pathway, and you know, as a leader, you're going to encourage people to walk it with you, kind of.
Yes. Yeah, we're on a journey together.
Yep.
Well, and I think first of all, Christal, mic drop moments sprinkled throughout your entire. In fact, I'm going to have to get a transcript of this because there are so many quotable moments from all of you, Janet, Marcia, and Christal. It's just incredible. But one of the things that really strikes me about the conversation that the four of us are having is that true leadership means risk. And I think that many people are in leadership positions and have not yet fully stepped into their leadership. And that's when the workforce becomes nervous because it's a trust issue. A leader needs to Marcia's point, a leader is required to show the future, give them a future, and let them know, Janet, the pathway to that future. But I think where we've seen leaders fail to respond is they're afraid. And their own fear to take that risk means that they've not stepped into their leadership, because that's what leading is. It's risk-taking, calculated risk-taking, but wisdom steeped with discernment, and putting out that wisdom to be able to give a container for your people to feel safe, to feel held, to know that, you know, the person at the helm has got them. And this is what you're talking about. And I think that is missing because people are afraid to take risks. And unfortunately, if you're taking a leadership position, guess what? You're
no choice. Now, well, I also think the other thing you mentioned there, I think it's being courageous enough to say, I don't have all the answers. This comment about uncertainty has probably been one of the hardest things for people of when can I return, or when will every one of us around the world has a question about when will we have a vaccine? When will this be over? When a million different things. And I think in the face of not knowing, it's okay to say, I don't know, but here's what I'm using as a barometer. Here's how I'm looking at it, or here's what's important to our business and our people. And I think the second part of it is about leadership, and what's so important now is action. Not having all the answers, but saying, here's what we're doing and here's how we're thinking about it. I think words are becoming hollow if you can't show a path, as you said, a very important word, Tamara, a path to, I don't know, but here's how I'm thinking about it. Here's what's important, and here's what we're working on and how we're going to get there. And the communicative nature of a leader, that communication of ongoing and transparent communication in the face of unknowns is really, really important. And I think that's where trust is, is built in these times where the world doesn't know the answer to questions, and it's difficult to answer those things. People ask all the time, can I go back into the office, to go back to kind of the core of what this is about? And I have to tell you, I do not know. And we are taking a very balanced and a very the lives and livelihood, kind of combination. But you know what's interesting about this? When we did a survey, about 70% of people said they don't want to go back. So if there are these constituents and groups of individuals, or maybe go back in the same way. They want flexibility. And I've always been a big believer, as someone who's been the recipient of this. I'm a mom of two grown children, 25 and 23. And one of the greatest gifts as a working mom has been my ability to put my kids on the bus in the morning, be there, sometimes all too often when they forgot something and I needed to run it to school, to be there to listen to them when they get home and they want to tell me the things about their day. I don't know if I could have done what I, had the career that I've had and felt okay about it. And it's taught my daughters. I'm going to tell you, one of the great blessings outside of what I've gained. My daughters have watched me work, and they've seen how hard it is. And they've sat at the dinner table having business conversations with me. And they've been surrounded by witnessing what it takes to do the jobs that we do, regardless of what your role is. And what an amazing gift that I feel that's given my daughters, to show them, one, anything's possible, especially with some of the gender bias. And then two, what hard work looks like. And they've been a part of it, and it's been a very special thing. But those things have really kind of come across with this idea of working from home. For me, is about balance, and it's about you may not know all the answers, but what I've said to my organization is, I don't know when we can all return, but I'm going to tell you this. This is the time where we take this opportunity to live the best lives inside and outside of this company, and options will be the way we go. And I need to support people for the lives that they live when they're not applying their time to Talend. So it's a really important inflection.
Mic drop. Oh my gosh, another mic drop.
I don't know about that, but I've lived this. And kind of someone said, once you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Once you've experienced, I think what's available to people when you really give people flexibility, and you support their whole selves. I've learned that from great leaders that I've worked with, like Elena Donio and Jen Morgan and Steve Singh. When you've lived under this type of leadership, you're like, I am never going back. There is not another way.
Liberating.
Yeah, exactly.
Liberating.
Well, Christal, Marcia, Janet, oh my gosh, this conversation. It's mind blowing. Like I said, I need to have a transcript, but I am so delighted that all of you stepped into your leadership for this talk, because you have been so incredibly transparent. Thank you for taking a risk with me to talk openly and honestly, because that is what's most helpful. And this is what it's about. It's about sharing your knowledge, your experience, and helping others. So thank you for being willing to do that here today. And I've really enjoyed this, and I hope everyone who's watching enjoys it too. And thanks again, everyone, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thanks, Tamara.